Hi everyone, I'm Richard, and joining me here in the Digital Foundry office is Tom Morgan.
Hi there.
And from deepest Frankfurt, I believe that we have John Linneman on the line there.
Hi Rich and Tom, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you very much. Very pleasant to have you with us.
Yes, likewise.
Well, here we are on our second Digital Foundry videocast, and first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who watched the first. Well over 100,000 views there, absolutely phenomenal. And it was literally just John and Tom talking about EGX, talking about the PS4 Pro, and we thought we would do this as regularly as we can do it. And the topic for discussion today is this, the PlayStation VR headset. Now, myself and Tom and John, we've all used the headset. We've all got our individual views on that. The review is up on the channel now and on the Eurogamer website, but this is a bit more background from all of us as to what we think of the individual elements of the headset. So John, what do you reckon? What's your overriding view of the PlayStation VR?
Well, thus far, having used all three headsets, I actually think that the PSVR is probably the most comfortable solution. The whole mechanism for fitting it onto your head, it feels excellent, and I like what they've done with the optics to sort of eliminate or minimize the screen door effect, even though it's a lower resolution screen. So it actually does look pretty good.
Yeah.
And I've been impressed by what they've been able to achieve using just a regular stock PS4. At the same time, I do think that the Move controllers for motion control are maybe not adequate compared to what you get with the Vive or the Oculus Touch.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the Move was a device well ahead of its time. But you're right. I mean, how old is it now? Several years old. 4, 5,
yeah,
maybe?
Something like that. It's a few years old for sure.
It was never designed for use with virtual reality. It was just kind of a good fit, I guess, for Sony. I think one thing which they do need to do is to bring this thing in as cheaply as possible, because, you know, it's basically the mainstream's best chance of getting an affordable VR device, and all elements of it have to be as cheap as possible, I guess. I mean, it's functional, but it's just lacks the kind of pin-sharp precision that we got with the Vive controller. I don't know what you think about that, Tom.
Well, I was limited to about maybe a half a day with the Vive, and that was easily the premier experience. You're not going to get a much better use of space in the games that those Vive optimized games gave. But yeah, my experience with the PlayStation VR was at the Paris Game Show, mainly.
Right.
And so I saw it quite a ways before we got our hands on it in the office. Got a look at Heist, there's a Drive Club there, all these things that were just hinting at what the possibilities were, but also some of the limitations that have actually kind of ended up in the final product that we were kind of aware of, like the resolution issues and several other factors which you've mentioned in your review.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this, John, but I'm not actually too concerned about the resolution of the screen as such, but it has to be paired with really good anti-aliasing on the part of the software. I don't really see this really as a hardware issue, more as a software side of the equation that's really needs some work. And I've got a feeling that PlayStation 4 Pro, that's going to be adding that extra layer of refinement to PlayStation VR.
I think I agree with you on that. For me, it's more, I mean, so the screen resolution on the other headsets is slightly higher for sure per eye, but it's also a pentile display matrix, so you see a little bit more of artifacting from that. But really the main thing is if you can downsample from a high enough resolution, it creates sort of a soft but relatively clean image, even on a 1080p VR headset like the PSVR or the Oculus DK2.
Yeah, there are actually some games which have this kind of really good anti-aliasing, or maybe even super sampling. Hustle Kings, for example, is really, really clean. And there's a game in VR Worlds called Danger Ball. It's kind of like 3D Pong. Very, very simple game. It's obvious they've got the budget there for really good AA or indeed super sampling, so it's not really an issue there. But, you know, there are some other titles which are still under embargo at the moment, unfortunately, where the resolution, there's lots of jagginess, and it kind of looks a bit poor compared to the Vive and Oculus Rift.
So we're talking about the top-end 3D stuff. I noticed on Drive Club in particular, on the build I saw, that was an issue per eye. What are we dealing with in terms of per eye? It's 960 by 1080?
By 1080, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a lot to work with, but if you can super sample to that resolution per eye, that is going to give you a good head start and all that.
Yeah, Farpoint, it's one of these VR games where you actually have that. Have you seen that comedy contraption function where you attach the Move, and it's like a gun. Farpoint uses that, and I've actually played that on PS4 Pro and on the standard PS4. And the thing about that is that on the preview build I saw on the PS4, it was actually dropping frames, and it had this kind of jagginess to the edges. On the Pro, well, the frame rate issues were gone, and also just the kind of the jagginess on the edges was definitely much more refined. So I think that's what the Pro is going to bring to the party there. But if they can restore some of the missing effects that we have in Drive Club, that would be fantastic. I'm not holding out much hope there, though. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. I think from my perspective, the thing which kind of annoyed me the most about PlayStation VR was setting it up in the living room. It's kind of where you're going to actually see PlayStation VR kind of, well, it's typically you've got your PS4 in the lounge, right? So that's where the VR setup's going to be. Now, obviously, Sony have put a great deal of thought into this. The social screen, for example, is a brilliant idea because, you know, people who are watching can get into the action, they can see what you're doing, and that all works brilliantly. But the one thing that really kind of frustrated me time and time again was the placement of the PlayStation camera there. It was, I was constantly moving out of tracking, and it was extremely frustrating.
And it's not a great camera to start with in terms of positioning it, because you've just got one like notch at the side so you can lever it upwards.
Yeah,
but that's all you've got.
We've got the original PlayStation camera here, and I believe Sony have got a revised model.
Okay, so they may have solved that.
I'm going to be kind of interested to see whether that actually works out, because from my perspective, actually just keeping within the playable area in a PSVR was a big challenge for me. And also the range of the camera is kind of limited to about, I don't know, 2 meters, something like that. And if you move out of that range, then basically you get all manner of flashing warning signs appearing on screen. It's not really good. And I'm actually, the way my lounge is set up, the sofa is actually just out of range. So I'm having to kind of lean in to sort of stay within there. And I can't help but think that maybe, again, we're dealing with legacy hardware here that Sony is kind of shoehorning into VR to make it work. And by and large, we've never had this problem before because it's always been in controlled conditions where,
that's true.
And we can actually, when you're at the PlayStation demo, they kind of move you into position, and that's it. And I've, in my previous demos, I've never actually had this out of positioning stuff coming up on screen.
I experienced it a little bit at the Tomb Raider one, actually.
Oh, really?
Because I was just in a big room, and eventually, you get disoriented in VR, and I was walking too far out of range, and the guy kept like grabbing me by the shoulders and pulling me back to the middle, like, you need to stay in this area. So...
To be fair, I never tried Oculus in the living room simply because it's kind of set up as a desktop experience at the moment. Now that might change when we have the Oculus Touch controllers.
I've used the Oculus quite a bit, by the way.
Oh, really?
In a larger space.
Uh-huh. How did it work out?
In some of the demos, like the Dream Deck, and there's a few others, you can basically walk around in a very Vive-like solution, although it's more limited by the occlusion of the camera and what it can see. But I've been able to stand reasonably far away from it within the limits of like, if you say like the maximum area or the minimum area, of what the Vive recommends for the setup. If I walk around that region, I could still be tracked by the Oculus.
Well, that's kind of good news then.
There's potential there. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, of course, occlusion. If you're playing with the Move controllers and you turn away from the camera and you're blocking the view of the moves, then your tracking is entirely lost. And I was kind of
it defers to the accelerometer and gyrometer.
Yeah, but it's woefully
nowhere
inaccurate.
near as accurate.
It's terrible.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I was playing Batman, and my hands were kind of like on the other side of the room. It was kind of quite bizarre. but
you felt like Batman after a long night.
Batman meets Mr. Fantastic, really, I think was kind of the experience I had there. I'll tell you what, the question I've got is, my sort of perception of VR to date has been that it's kind of a series of tech demos as opposed to a gaming platform.
But isn't that always true of a new VR platform?
Well, that's my question. Based on what you've seen so far, do you actually think that this is a properly viable gaming platform? Or, I mean, I've obviously got the advantage here in that I've played
All of them.
well, a lot of the stuff. There's still
Yeah.
a few third-party games at the time of filming. I've not yet had the chance to experience Job Simulator, that sort of thing. I've played that on the Vive, mind you. But I think they've got a good strategy in that they're trying to get big-name titles onto the VR. And Drive Club, I think that is pretty much viable as a full game.
Yeah, that's the jewel in the crown.
It's sort of like Project Cars equivalent, I guess, that we have on the PC.
Yeah, that's it. That's a fair comparison.
Is it the full Drive Club game, by the way?
It's certainly a huge portion of it based on what I've seen, but that's still under embargo, so I can't really talk about it. It's kind of a bit weird that they've got Sony's got a two-tier embargo here where we can talk about some stuff now and some stuff later on the 12th, I believe it is. So there's stuff that we can't really talk about at the moment in depth, but we can, I guess, talk about Drive Club because we've played it on preview.
I've played
areas.
it, and Tom has as well, right?
Yeah, and it's really impressive. There's some really nice showcase features there. I particularly liked the way you can view the cars, get in, have a look around, see all the materials there. It's really good stuff.
It absolutely makes you feel like you're in the spirit of the moment in the car. And they actually, at the Paris Games Show build that I played, they obviously had it in the best case scenario with you in a rig, steering wheel, all that good stuff. Stuff that, to be honest, most of us won't be able to afford to put together ourselves. And a big part of that was to, I think, avoid the nausea that goes with the VR experience, because when you're controlling game with the control in hand, there's a bit of a disconnect there. But with the steering wheel, certainly with Drive Club, it was meant to kind of sidestep some of that. But it was a really good looking game, despite some of the cutbacks, the obvious visual stuff like moving from the deferred lighting model of the normal game to a forward renderer.
And the dynamic weather has gone as well.
Yeah, a couple of things. They were thinking of baking in a lot of the lighting to bring back some of the flourish.
I think that's what they've done. There are some nice lighting effects in it. Yeah, definitely.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
How has the headset been for long-term comfort? Like, I've always had issues with wearing these headsets for more than like 15, 20 minutes at a time.
I did 12 hours of PSVR yesterday. And
wow, 12 hours.
Yeah, pretty much from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
And how did you feel after all that?
I had to sleep it off, literally, because this is a discussion we had at E3, John, where we were talking about Nausea, and you were saying that Sony don't really seem to be giving too much attention to the nausea issue.
Exactly.
There are a lot of games where you play them and, well, the bottom line is, if there's kind of movement in the real world, for example, sharp lateral movement that isn't in the virtual world, that isn't in the real world, you're going to have problems. And Sony seem to have built many of their games around this concept. There's at least 2 in VR worlds that made me feel quite ill. The worst being VR Luge, where you kind of move your head about to guide this luge.
Which is interesting, because that was one of the very first PlayStation VR titles they showed off, I think 2 years ago. It was like when they were very, demoing it, just trialing it to people at select booths. And so Luge, they just said, oh, it's fine because you can see your legs as you're sliding on a skateboard down a hill. And they said, oh, that avoids that disconnect.
Generally speaking, if you're moving forwards, and this is kind of why Farpoint, that shooter I was talking about, works. If you're walking forwards, absolutely fine. But if you're sort of weaving about and
knocking against the walls.
Space Scavenger, I think it's called, in VR worlds, actually has you doing kind of big jumps that are loop the loops. And it's kind of, calm down, guys. It really is sort of pretty serious stuff. And I think my perception of it is that Sony kind of, they just don't really seem to be treating nausea as an issue. Now in Vive, you can play that all day because for the most part it's room scale. You're physically walking about. The Rift actually has comfort warnings for each. And I'm kind of concerned that people are going to be buying games and getting sick and never playing them again. They're not going to be able to get a refund on that. And
Yeah, it was like a star system on the Rift store front, wasn't it?
yeah, there's a comfort rating, moderate, severe.
They just list the rating.
Yeah,
I'm surprised, given the delayed release of PSVR, that they haven't aped that in some way, because it's a very good idea, and I can imagine a lot of people saying, hang on, I can't enjoy this game I spent all this money on.
There's a lot of problems with any game where the right stick controls your movement.
Yep.
Right, so Battlezone.
Battlezone,
Rigs.
Rigs, the tank thing in Stardust.
Yeah.
That game I was talking about, the Space Scavenger and VR Worlds. There's a lot of sort of right stick movement on that.
So about this, about this issue of nausea, I haven't experienced any of it except for one game. I went through about 6 VR games on the day that I did experience PlayStation VR. I got to Battlezone thinking, wow, what was all the hype about? I've never, had any issues with it whatsoever. Yeah, about 5 minutes into that, it may have been because it was the last on the run, and I've been through the heist, I've been through Drive Club, all that. But actually, by that point, I was like, okay, I'm gonna grit my teeth and grind through it, and I'm gonna say thank you because I'm British, and even if I'm having a bad time, I'll just politely say thank you and walk away. But yeah, that was the one.
I think generally though they're doing the right thing. They're getting big names onto PlayStation VR. So you've got Tomb Raider. You've got Star Wars Battlefront. They've got Call of Duty. If there's a section of that, that's going to be interesting. I haven't actually played that. I'm really looking forward to it. What else? I mean, Drive Club, of course. I'm going to be interested to see what else they come up with, because there's a lot of smaller scale titles that just work amazingly well, like Tumble VR.
Oh, that was one of the launch titles for the Move in the first place.
Right, oh really? So they've got this on PS4, they've got this on VR, and it's just absolutely amazing. It's just simple, but really makes the most of the technology. And that was really, really impressive. It was one of my highlights, actually. And it just comes down to a very simple concept, moving stuff about in a 3D space with very realistic physics. Just works really, really well.
I suspect that game is perfect for VR because the whole the depth perception, which was missing from the original on TV version.
Of course.
Like that probably brings a whole new dimension to it.
Yeah, they worked around that at the time with shadows in much the same way as Mario does, trying to work out the space and where you're going to land it. But yeah, this time it makes perfect sense. It's a perfect fit for VR, and I'm really glad they had the foresight to bring it.
The thing is, though, none of you guys are tempted to buy one, though, are you?
Was it £350?
Something like that.
It's tough because we got the Pro coming out, and it's the choice between, do you want this upgraded console or do you want the VR experience, 4K or VR? And ideally, you'd want both to have like the most pristine image and all that. But yeah, it's going to be a tricky one and it'll be an interesting test of where the interest lies among buyers this Christmas.
The same issue for me, where I actually had one pre-ordered, but ended up going back on it because, mainly because I bought that OLED TV and I opted to invest in 2 dimensions instead of VR. Plus, I already have the Oculus Rift, and I don't find that I use it that often in the end.
Right.
I really like VR. I've been using it since the DK2, but it's just like the honeymoon's over, and I'm just looking for really good software that's compelling enough to keep me in the 3D space.
Are you worried about being burnt again by the VR experience, or do you think there's something PlayStation VR can kind of bring that you haven't seen before?
Well, I think for me, it's not the PlayStation VR hardware has 2 things. Well, the hardware itself is more comfortable, which is actually very appealing because I don't like wearing the Vive for long, or Vive or the Oculus for long, because of the way it kind of sits on your head. And I think PSVR is probably better for long, real gaming sessions. Yeah. But also, I mean, Sony is bringing to the table more in the way of like third-party support and like games that we might actually really want to play, instead of just a bunch of like weird little tech demos and stuff that, if you look at them from the VR perspective, they can be fascinating. But if I say this game is not a game I would actually want to play on a TV because the game itself just isn't interesting, then once the honeymoon or the VR, the impressiveness of VR has worn off, then it's like, well, I'm I'm not looking for that anymore. So if Sony can bring the big names, I think the hardware is good enough to support it, even if it's not the best hardware available, which it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be the best hardware. It just has to have the right balance between the experience and the price point. And I think they've done a really good job there. I'm really impressed with what they've done there. But at the same time, you know, a month later, they're asking you to spend £350, $400 on PS4 Pro. Most people, I think they're going to go for one or the other or neither. I mean, I guess the one thing is that Sony does have the advantage in that there's no next-gen Xbox coming this year.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess maybe they're going to get, you know, at least a lot of people buying simply because they're the only game in town when it comes to new hardware. And I also think that PlayStation VR is the most accessible. You don't need anything apart from a PS4 to play it. Oh, and the camera, of course. Let's not forget that. And I think that's really compelling. It's a low barrier of entry, or rather a lower barrier of entry.
For sure.
And that's really important. And I think they've done, you know, as you say, it is the most comfortable headset of the bunch by a country mile. And secondly, for those of us that wear glasses, you've got the Rift, haven't you, John? I mean, I don't know about you, but I can barely fit my glasses in there. And even when I do, they're kind of all sort of skewed and...
I've gotten used to it, I have to say. But it's still... It does feel like after a while, like it's pushing the glasses against your face in such a way that's not very comfortable.
And also the way that the straps work, it kind of, it's basically pushing the screen against your face. Whereas the whole system that you've got on the PSVR of this little button at the bottom here, and it kind of just moves in and out. It's genius. It really is. I mean, there's one thing that you just can't take away from Sony, and it's the fact that in terms of, you know, ergonomics, hardware design, they just know what they're doing.
I want to point out, I was actually one of the few people, I guess, that invested in Sony's HMZ T1.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I actually bought that thing for like a significant amount of money, we should say, at the time. And it was not very comfortable, I have to say. It was probably less comfortable than the Oculus or the Vive even.
Doesn't it like place a huge amount of pressure on your forehead?
Oh my goodness, it was just not comfortable to wear for a long time. I never liked using it.
You still got it, haven't you?
Yeah, I do have it actually. It's an interesting piece of kit. I mean, it's got two 720p OLED displays in there. Kind of the best way to view older 3D content like that, because there's no crosstalk, obviously. It's just, and you're using OLED displays, so it looks very, very good.
So yeah, I mean, overall, I'm really impressed with it. I think it is, in terms of, everything's relative, isn't it? I mean, £350 for a headset is a lot of money, but it's cheaper than £700 for the PC headset plus a £1,000 PC, which is what you're looking at otherwise.
So after your day with PSVR, what were kind of the games that you would recommend to people who come around and want to just see it for the first time?
The VR Worlds is worth checking out as a kind of sampler of what VR is all about. The demo disc actually has a lot of stuff on it, even the cut down European one. There's a lot of content to go through on there, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff. It's not exactly the best game as such, but Batman VR is interesting. There's some really great moments in there. There's a huge kind of Gotham City vista to enjoy. There's suiting up as Batman. There's a really good bit, probably my favorite VR moment there, where you put on the cowl and you can you get this calibration mirror screen come up and you can actually kind of look at it. And you are Batman. You're looking back at yourself as the Batman model from all the Arkham games, and that's cool. Really cool, yeah. And you can bring up your fists, and as long as the tracking works, and you're actually, it's quite interesting. I did that section where it wasn't tracking correctly, and I was kind of doing this because the tracking was all over the place. My arm was like on the other side.
And didn't you have a belt that was built for Homer Simpson as well?
Right. That's right. It was kind of like a Simon Cowell bat belt, where it was kind of the belt was sort of up around my midriff rather than sort of where it should be. That was kind of a bit strange. And yeah, there's a lot of minor tracking issues that you'll sort of come across, but it's not a deal breaker. And that's kind of where we're at with
How does it actually
PSVR.
look, by the way? I mean, Arkham Knight was one of the best looking games on the PS4. I mean, I know it's a smaller
Yeah.
scale, but does it actually resemble that at all? Or
Well, you know, that's the thing, isn't it? Everyone knows that it's coming, but we don't actually know what it looks like until now, because Rocksteady didn't want us to do any filming when we saw it at the preview, couldn't want to do anything. And the reason why is because in terms of a linear A to B experience, there are bits and pieces that kind of enhance the lastability of the game. If you show virtually anything from the game outside of the Batcave, you're in spoiler territory, because, you know, it's kind of like, right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to sort of, you know, it is one series of logic puzzles, one after the other. But in terms of the visual look, it is kind of very, very similar to having Arkham, kind of like a mixture of Arkham City versus Arkham Knight level visuals in VR, and you kind of have to play it. So yeah, I think, you know, as an experience, it's worth looking at. And there are various little puzzling elements that are added after the game once you've completed it, which are kind of designed to bring you back. So that was a highlight, but I think a lot of people may get a little bit frustrated that it's over so quickly. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap this up for now. Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, once again, thanks very much for watching the first video cast. We're going to do more as and when we have things to discuss. And yeah, we're going to have, I think next time we're going to be doing a more extended take on the PlayStation 4 Pro. More things have turned up. Obviously, we've played Mantis Burn Rating since then. And obviously, I'd really like to compare notes with these guys who played it at EGX. Some interesting points that they pointed out in the first video cast, which I hadn't really picked up on. So we'll be talking about that. Now, if you guys have any questions at all about the PS4 Pro, or just generally about Digital Foundry, please do feel free to leave some questions in the comments. But that's all for now. I'd like to thank Tom.
No worries.
And John.
thank you.
Brilliant stuff. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.